Hi everyone. Thanks for coming to my talk for the start of the second day of BlinkOn. I'm Dirk Pranke, for those of you who don't know me, and I am these days doing a lot of work sort of trying to bridge the Blink community and the infrastructure teams that power all of the sites and tools that we work on, that we use and rely on, not just for Blink, but for Chromium, for Chrome OS, for a bunch of other projects. Yeah, and so that team is actually headed by a guy named Chase Phillips, who I'm not sure if anybody from him or I know he's not here. I don't know if anybody from his team is here. Oh, one is Stefan's there, back in the back, um, and they do all the heavy lifting. So this talk is going to be different than at least most of the talks were yesterday. A lot of the talks yesterday were about look at these things that you may not be aware of in Chrome, because some of you are not necessarily familiar with Chrome, like about tracing and the profiling and all those other cool tools. You guys all know the tools that I'm going to be talking about now. So I'm not going to be demonstrating them. I'm going to assume you mostly know them. If you don't, I'm sorry. Try to catch along, and the important takeaway, what I'm really here for today, is to find out what doesn't work for you. Um, so the good news about a lot of these tools is that a lot of you were familiar with them already from working on WebKit. A lot of things didn't change. A lot of the work we've been doing over the past couple months has actually been to get us back up to parity with where we were with WebKit, and I think we're actually getting pretty close. So, um, what I thought the best, I thought about how to do this for a while, and the best way I thought I would do about this is to do maybe like a 5 minute, really quick lightning run through of the different tools that we're using, what I believe the state of them are, what I am aware of as open issues are, and then really most of the rest of the time, I just want to hear from you. What works for you? What doesn't work for you? What would you love to see? In particular, anybody who's here who isn't part of Google, like I get pretty good feedback from everybody around me at Google, but for the people at all of our other contributing companies, let me know what is still working for you, what's a pain in the ass, so we can talk about whether or not we can fix it. All right. So there's really sort of two big workflows that we do on Blink using the tools. The first is obvious, the dev flow, right? Everybody who's committing patches. The second is the gardening flow of trying to keep things up to date, green, happy, and rolling downstream into Chromium. I'm not going to talk as much about the gardening flow. A lot of you don't care about it. And somewhat controversially, I'm going to talk a little bit about it at the end because I want to kill it. I want it to just go away. And I think that'll make a lot of people inside Google happy. We've had a lot of people outside of Google ask, hey, what is this gardening thing? I want to help. Should I be a part of it? Basically, the nutshell summary is we really don't want to inflict it on you. It's not a fun job. We don't want to ask anybody who's not being paid to have to do this full time to even bother working on it. And like I said, I want to kill it. So hopefully you'll never need to care. All right, but the dev cycle. Let me just run through real quickly all of the different tools that we expect to use. I'm going to go into a little more detail on each of these steps, right? So the first thing you do is you get the code. You try to build something. Hopefully that works pretty well. I'm not even going to talk about how you actually modify code because there's a million different ways to do it, and that's up to you. You may run tests locally, right? You're going to want to upload a patch for review. You're going to want to upload a patch so then you can submit it to the try servers and run it on the other configurations. Assuming the review passes, assuming the test jobs pass, then you're going to want to land the change. Normally, we want you to use the commit queue for this. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Of course, once you land the change, we're going to care whether or not it passes even more tests, right? So you may be watching the tree looking for failures. You may be expecting somebody to actually come and holler at you if you broke something. In some cases, you may actually have to update test baselines, right? New pixel results, new expected text render tree results, and things like that. Talk a little bit about that, and then basically you're done, and then you just wait for the downstream fallout where you eventually figure out that you broke CNN, right? Um, okay, so let's talk about this a little bit more, just step by step. So hopefully everybody here most of the time is using Fetch to get the code, right? Fetch is a new tool that we wrote right when we forked Blink. We did it in about a day, and then we immediately stopped working on it. So it really only kind of sort of works, and there's a bunch of improvements we would like to make for it. Fetch is one of these things that's actually owned by the infrastructure team I mentioned earlier, and that actually, the reason we haven't really done anything to work on it is because they're in the middle of sort of transitioning their entire infrastructure to a different way of working on all of the different products they support. So they're moving to something called recipes. Recipes are basically just little data descriptions of the different steps you need to do to build and check out the code and test and things like that for all the different product configurations. And then they have a new front end that's going to read this little recipe database called Wick. Um, and basically, you'll just replace, like, fetch blink with Wick fetch blink or something like that. I don't know if the syntax actually has been worked out. But these guys, the infrastructure guys, are really super busy because they actually have to spend probably 2/3 or 3/4 of their time, Stefan can correct me, if just trying to keep everything up, right? And then they try to actually write the tools to make life better in that other quarter of the time. And obviously, anybody who's ever had that sort of job knows it's a real balancing act of just, you really, like, everything's broken and it would just be so much easier if I could just get the time to write the tools, but I can't take the world down or leave the world burning while I'm doing that. So sometimes they aren't able to make progress as quickly as they want. They also have lots of fun fires of, like, migrating everybody off of Subversion and onto Git on Borg, which is our new Git infrastructure. And we do that because, for whatever reason, for example, somebody checked in a file into WebKit 5 years ago, and the Subversion server hates it. We don't know why, but you'll try and check out the code out of Subversion. This was true in WebKit and is still true in Blink, and it'll just fail, and we don't know why. So we need to move on to Git. And they're doing a lot of work on that because actually, not surprisingly, Chromium and Blink are both very, very large projects with lots of history, lots of binary files. Kind of a challenge to actually get this into a big Git repo. And scalable, and might get everything migrated over. So they've been spending a lot of time working on that. I believe they're still hoping to do the cut over of Chromium itself, not the Blink repo, but the Chromium repo to Git in October. Is that right? Yes. Hopefully this year, right? Yeah, and it's a challenge because, of course, we always have this rolling release cycle, and in the holidays, everything gets locked down because you don't want to be doing big things in December when people go on vacation. So, trying to find a safe window to even do this and then hope to shake out all the bugs is tricky. Okay, but at any rate, so you're all basically using Fetch, and it all sort of kind of works most of the time. And then you're off in Git land, right? Nobody's really trying to still use SVN, hopefully, please. Okay, good. Don't tell me if you are. Huh? Yeah, Emil. Hopefully Emil is not here. And I deal with him separately. But he's on Git now? Okay. Hopefully those of you who were learning Git as part of this transition have sort of gotten over that hump and then figured out that there's actually 50 different ways to use Git. I'm not going to talk about any of them. I think it would actually be really nice if we had some recommended practices of, here's how, most people use a rebase workflow or a merge workflow and, common tools and things like that. Damn it. But I haven't written that yet. So it would be nice if we could get that written. Another thing I know that comes up, a lot of people, especially as you're finding yourself working on things that are out of Blink core, right? And we move more to the model that Eric and Adam were talking about yesterday. We're pushing more stuff out of Blink and into modules, and some of those modules will live in content, and some of those modules may even live someplace else. And it's a huge hassle to actually, a lot of you who are Blink developers may also hopefully will become Chromium developers and Chromium committers. And it's a hassle to land changes that cross both repos, right? Those of us who know this, it's like you hear about two-sided patches and you're like, oh, geez, no, two-sided patch. We're hoping to merge the repos. I don't know when. Nobody has even been brave enough to suggest a timeline for this. It'll be after everybody converts to Git because we can't even get our heads wrapped around how you might merge two Subversion repos. But one big challenge that we have with that is figuring out what to do with, all of the baselines that we don't even really care about anymore that take up a huge amount of space, right? We had, um, multiple sets of full copies of the pixel test baselines that have been updated multiple times. They take up gigabytes of space, and we, just might want to prune them out when we merge the repos because nobody's looked at them in a year. And we'll, obviously keep the history off somewhere else if you really need it. Another thing that might be interesting is especially, if you're working in places you don't necessarily have blazing fast connections to the Google colos, gets a huge download. There's no getting around the fact that it's a huge download. Maybe we should be doing things to make that easier so people can actually get the initial bootstrap up and going. Okay, I spent a little bit too much time on that, so I'm going to speed up. Building code. Everybody using Ninja, pretty much. If you're not, try it out. You really don't want to use anything else. One tip we may actually be moving to a world where really that is the only supported configuration. Some people miss the integrated development environments thing. A lot of people don't know about this, but there is actually a setting, a generator that you can use with JIP called MSVS-Ninja, which generates Visual Studio project files if you're still working on Windows. Hopefully, at least some of you are, but actually uses Ninja to build. So you can debug, you can browse the code, you can edit in Visual Studio and use Ninja to build. So check that out if you can. We all know JIP is a little slow at this point. A lot of Python code running on a very huge project. People, I think, are working on how to speed that up. Another thing that Peter talked about yesterday that's an issue as we're seeing more and more people push to make Android, the primary port that we're working and testing on, making that easier to develop on Linux, especially to be able to do side-by-side builds in a single checkout of both Android and Linux. That's something that's coming. Okay, running tests locally. As far as I know, this basically kind of works. Hopefully you'll tell me if I'm wrong here. One thing, I sent out a note, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, there's a new concept of smoke tests. Peter also mentioned this yesterday, but it's not Android specific. It's just if you want to run something really quick and says, did I really break the world? I don't want to do a full build or a full test cycle. You can run the smoke test. It's just run webkit test --smoke. It runs the, let's say, 2 to 5 fastest tests in basically every directory. And on a desktop machine, developer class machine, if you have like 8 or 16 cores, this takes like 10 seconds. So it's actually a really nice fast way to just be like, sanity check, okay, the world isn't broken. Also, Peter talked again about this yesterday. This is a big thing for me. It's just not practical to expect everybody to have an Android device necessarily hooked up to their desktop and they're dog slow. And, the difference between running tests on these 16-core desktop machines or 8-core desktop machines and one Android device is like 40 times slower. So, your 5-minute or 7-minute test cycle on the desktop turns into hours, and that just sucks. So we're trying to figure out a way of making it so that you don't have to have devices hooked up, and we can still get some testing done in parallel. So we're going to be working on that a bunch in Q4. Okay, uploading for review. I don't know about you, but for me, Rietveld has been very buggy lately. Like a lot, I probably have like a 50% success rate of getting the patch uploaded versus you get this mysterious base files missing change. We don't really know what's going on there, but hopefully somebody will dig into that and fix it soon. Otherwise, I think Rietveld basically works pretty well. Julia's been doing a bunch of work trying to make the UI better. I think there's probably a bunch of cases of UI enhancements that haven't landed yet that she's got in flight, and also things we might like to see. Like, Rietveld is designed for Google's internal coding styles where everything was 80 columns. It's not so friendly with Blink code, so maybe it would be nice to actually make that work. Maybe it would be nice to bring back like the pretty diff format as an option so that you could see things slightly different ways. These are other things. Also, you saw last week or the week before, you can now actually upload patches with binary files. As far as I know, this basically works. I think there's some corner cases that may not work yet. But you know, a lot of cases you're going to want to upload stuff with at least an initial set of baselines to see if that works, and so you can review them. Please give it a shot. File bugs if it doesn't work. That's definitely the mode we're in right now. I want to know where you're hitting trouble. It's hard to test all of the different configurations and weirdness just up front for this. So please let me know. Okay, try jobs. Um, Hopefully everybody who is actually committing patches to Blink has try job access. If you don't, basically the only barrier we have is that we need to know who you are, right? So it's not open to the world like WebKit was, where you could just sort of upload a patch and click a button. We actually asked to do one more step, and unfortunately, I know the process for that is not very clear until we can actually figure out a better way of documenting this and getting it published. Just send me emails. If you don't have access, send me an email, say, hey, I'd like to have access. We talk about this as being Subversion read-only access, which is a terrible name given that we're moving away from Subversion and really has nothing to do with read-only access. But think of it as like or contributor access. Just send me an email and we can get that working for you. Also, we had a big step forward a month or two ago where we're actually retrying the try jobs both with and without your patches, so we can hopefully filter out failures that already exist in the tree. And as far as I can tell, between that and a lot of the other stability enhancements that we've made, you know, and bug fixes and things like that, try jobs are actually pretty stable now, at least for me. So I would love to hear it if that's not true for you and if you're seeing problems. Okay, land the change. The commit queue mostly works most of the time, especially for Blink, like, you know, off West Coast peak times, I typically see the commit queue picking up a change, running the patches, and landing things maybe as fast as a half hour, sometimes an hour. Chromium side is much slower, unfortunately, but it does at least actually work, again, with the changes that we've had to these try servers and dealing with flakiness. I think it's mostly working these days. We really want to encourage people to use the commit queue. How many of you are not using the commit queue most of the time? Anybody? Again, yeah, don't tell me. So, all right, and we, yes.
Just a quick question with the commit queue. Like if I upload my patch for review, if I click the six like win Mathematics try it and debug pods straight away, does that help my cycle time? Like if my reviewer takes 15 minutes to review it, have I sort of gained 15 minutes of time there?
Theoretically, yes. Yeah, theoretically, the commit queue is supposed to be smart enough to look and say, hey, were the try jobs run recently and did they all pass? If so, I'll skip them. I actually have not stared at that recently to make sure it's still working. And we really do actually need to make the UI better so you can just get the default set of try jobs that the commit queue is going to run. Like that should be one button. You shouldn't have to see this whole list of 50 bots and guess as to which ones they are. But
Do you happen to know off the top of your head how recently is? Because
I want to say it's a few hours,
okay.
but I'm not positive.
I live 7 hours out of the Mountain View time zone, and I you know do whatever I can to pipeline things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a few hours. I don't think it's a full day. I think we've considered it being up to a full day, but I'm not sure.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay. Watching for failures. These days, we have this sort of green tree policy that is different than what we had in webkit.org, right? We want things to be green most of the time. You should be able to sync to basically any revision of Blink and have the odds be good that things actually work. I think we're doing pretty well. The tree only can be closed automatically on compile failures, and I hardly ever see that. Most of the compile failures I see actually tend to be like weird flaky bot problems and not actual bad patches landing in the tree. There is some talk by me of maybe actually moving to a point where even test failures will make the tree red. I think that's something I'd like to hear feedback on, see if you think that's a good idea or not. If you are watching for failures, bring up Garden-O-Matic. You know, Garden-O-Matic is by far the best way, in my experience, to actually see what's broken on the tree. It's way easier than trying to parse all of the columns and rows of data on the build bots. I would love to actually make this a hosted service. So rather than you having to run this locally, we should just have another Google App Engine app or something where the current state is reflected. And even better, gardeners and people can annotate changes and be like, oh yeah, this set of failures was caused by this change. I've fixed it in this change. We're just waiting for the bots to cycle, and we could make it the knowledge just be shared, right? So you can switch if you're rotating from gardener to gardener, or you want to see, just go see what's the deal is when the tree, when you're looking at it and you're wondering why it's closed or why it's red. We saw that actually with the perf sheriffs and their perf graphs yesterday, right? They have the ability to annotate perf regressions and say what's going on. I think we should have the same thing for layout tests. So, and I don't think that would be hard to do. And then there's some talk, I'll come back to the rest of the stuff on this slide. Also, we're basically trying to keep the cycle times on the bots very relatively fast, so that your changes from the time you land to the time you get through all of the builds and tests, hopefully is about a half hour. I think we're pretty close to that now. I think we're slower on a lot of the Chromium side bots and Chromium tests, like just the Linux tests that run unit tests and browser tests. Those are slower, but the Blink side changes for layout tests and the Blink unit tests and things like that are all pretty fast. And okay, updating baselines is almost a solved problem at this point. Everybody hopefully has had, if you've had to update baselines, you've had a chance to use the auto rebaseline bot that Oshan wrote. That's like one of the biggest steps forward in productivity, I think, for the team that we've seen in a couple years. It just all works now. It's great. And then, of course, now that you can upload new binary results and have them go through the try servers, even that'll be less and less frequently needed. How many, if anybody besides me, has had to deal with rebaselining lots of failures at a time? Few people, right? So yeah, I mean, I've had to deal with bringing up new ports where it's actually like literally you have 6,000 pixel tests that you have to rebaseline. The tools aren't great for that. Auto rebaseline bot is gonna kind of choke at that. Garden-O-Matic you wouldn't want to use for that, but there's very few people who need to worry about this. Until I hear that it's a bigger problem, we're probably not going to spend a lot of time worrying about that. And then mostly also I want to say that my hope is to actually make this problem become less and less common, right? So we just don't have to do it that much. Okay, gardening cycle, again, I'm not going to talk about this much. But basically what I would like to do is move to a world where it's more and more the tree is just always green, things are always working. We have the auto roll bot now for build bot, the auto roll bot for building and rolling into Chromium, and that mostly seems to work. The success rate is probably 75–80% of the time. It's actually doing the right thing, and you do hit, of course, failures when you try to get into Chrome that we wouldn't have caught otherwise, but. Anybody here who has done gardening and did gardening like a year or 2 years ago will tell you it is just night and day different. Obviously, a lot of that is because we don't have as many configurations to test as we did in WebKit. Part of it is the fact that we are trying to keep the tree green all the time, which is possible now and wasn't really possible in WebKit. But yeah, it's almost just a no-op, and we just need, I'm contemplating, can we get to a point where we just moved to a monitor mode and you just get alerts or things like that when something is broken, and you don't have to spend your days glued to the screen. But again, hopefully not too many people outside of Google even really care about this. So some things we might want to do there. Obviously, if we get to the point where we can merge repos, we don't even have roles, right? There's nothing to roll to. Chromium has a much stricter policy about landing things that cause failures, right? So we kind of sort of tolerate it in Blink. They don't tolerate it at all. So, we're going to probably want to, we can always do things a little differently on different bots, but I think, for harmonious community happiness, we want to get closer to the world where things are just green even more of the time. And again, like I said, I think we're getting pretty close. So hopefully this won't be a big deal. And that's about it. So the one thing I think I skipped over earlier that I am very aware of is that I know that there are a lot of contributors from companies other than Google that would love to have first-class tool support for their company or individual contributor email names, that email IDs. They don't want to have to use the chromium.org IDs. I know about it. We do actually want to fix it. It's a matter of finding the time and finding all of the stupid, hidden places in the code where we've hard coded things one way or another. So it is still on our plate to try and fix that. Um, what else is there? So this is the point now where I want to hear from you guys. What doesn't work? What are you having trouble with? What would you love to see? Yeah, back and back.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, what's the preferred way of filing feedback with you if, say, a step in the build process doesn't work, or if there's some new failure of some sort? I mean, I see people talking on IRC, sometimes people email on BlinkOn. I imagine you get a lot of personal emails and IMs. Sometimes people file bugs. What's the preferred way?
I don't really care. Whatever works for you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Bugs are nice, right? Bugs are the best way of actually tracking things. But if you don't even know if something is a bug yet, just, holler at me on IRC if I'm online or send me. I don't care. So, yeah. Back one more for the back.
I do prefer the bugs because sometimes we'll get a flurry of 8 people pinging you on chat at a time, and some of them get forgotten.
Oh, right. Yeah. So this is Stefan. He's on the infrastructure team. He's, I'm sure, speaking for everybody on that team, right? Because they don't want to get hammered by like 50 or 100 different people all seeing the same thing. So yeah, at the point, like if your question is not just like, hey, was this some stupid user error on my part, but hey, it's really this looks like there's a problem. We do want to get that into a bug as quickly as possible. Yep.
Recently, there was some change in the fetch because managed and unmanaged.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I noticed that when you do the fetch with the clean directory, it's still coming in with a key client of unmanaged. And anyway,
Is it?
can you talk about
I don't think that. I'm not sure if that.
I did it 2 days ago.
Okay. I don't. I believe you. Like, and I haven't tried it recently, so that may be true. Yeah. So the difference between managed and unmanaged mode. Basically, I don't remember how much of this I put on notes to the list versus talking to people individually, but the difference has to do with how you're doing development on branches that aren't tracking the repo directly. And G-Client attempts to do some smart things to try and figure out what you want to do if you're on a different branch, and usually it does the wrong thing. So gradually we realized that, look, life just is really complicated if you're in a Git world and G-Client is trying to update your main repo behind your back. Like, it'll just do things you're not expecting. So what that means is that if the managed mode is true and you type G-Client sync, G-Client will attempt to update your Chromium checkout and pull it up to match the origin. If managed mode is false, it'll leave your main Chromium checkout alone and just run the hooks and try to update all of the dependent projects. Now, the catch here is that for us Blink developers, really managed versus unmanaged doesn't actually have any effect, and it doesn't do what you might want it to do. So you actually need to do the same sort of thing manually to go in and tell it, stop messing with my Blink checkout. I only want to update that by hand itself. And we've had some discussion actually figuring out how to implement that in Fetch and G-Client is a little bit trickier than what we did with the main managed, unmanaged Chromium checkout. So we want to do a little work on that. And it's possible that, yeah, we forgot to update the Blink recipe to do something one way or another. That said, if you do actually manage to figure out how the managed mode is trying to do things, it's not, you can make it work. So it's not like, oh my God, we just figured out that managed mode was totally broken, stop using it. Like, if it is working for you, great, just keep using it and, flip the flag back. So, okay, any other problems people are hitting, other questions? Ken? Two Kens?
You mentioned trying to use grid size for other platforms for OSS. Are you
Yes.
working on that?
Am I actually working on that?
Actively?
Actively working on that. Actively working on it. No, not actively. Actively, I am working on bringing Android up. And also, the other thing that I've been meaning to send a note out to BlinkDev about this. I will after this talk. If you're developing on Windows, you may wonder why you build locally and get thousands of failures and the bots don't. You heard people talking yesterday about Aura. So Aura is actually disabled on the bots, but it is not disabled by default on your checkouts. So there's some switches you can flip and jip to turn it off to match the bots. I'm actually also actively working on fixing that so that the layout test on Windows will just work in either configuration. Um, Once we get Android to a basic level of stability, and we work out some of these infrastructure issues of how where people are going to be running the tests, I am going to go back to using FreeType everywhere for tests. But I don't have to do this work. I would love for some other people to if you're interested. The changes are not hard. They're just changes. And so if you're interested, please let me know. Drop me a line. I'd be happy to hand this off to somebody else. All right, other questions? That can. You're welcome. Oh, he was thanking me for making sure that you could run the tests in parallel, which we've had for a while. Yeah. Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. So the answer is probably somewhere between no, we don't know what the long-term solution is. Yeah, so the question was Git submodules. A lot of you may have seen the submodule flow, right? And how does that interact with fetch, which doesn't use it? And you may have been told for a while, oh yeah, this is the new hotness, use submodules. It turns out that after we ran that for a few months, we kind of found some flaws in how well that works. And Git doesn't really have a great answer to the multiple repo sync things. So, you'll see a meme floating around on the internet like, oh, you had a problem, so you decided to try and use submodules to fix it. Now you have two problems. And so we tried to solve that problem with gclient. The Android team tried to solve that problem with repo. I don't think the core Git team has sort of been trying to solve that with submodules. But I don't think there's a solution that really works really well for everybody. And I don't think we really quite know what we're going to use yet. Hopefully, my personal guess is that gclient's not going away. I think we will probably evolve gclient into a front end that does. Maybe it'll be a front end on top of submodules, but that basic UI of here's how you specify your dependencies and how you sync things to update probably isn't going away. But I could be wrong. Yeah.
Could you describe what the actual low-level problem with submodules is? Because, I mean, we've used submodules and we use gclient. None of them are great, but submodules are less annoying than gclient, at least. So what's the blocker here?
Stephanie, you wanna try and answer that one? Oh yeah. So the question is, what is the low-level problem with submodules?
Actually, more basic question. So
What are submodules?
What problem are they solving?
So okay, right. So all of these tools, repo, gclient, submodules, attempt to solve the problem that you're actually, well, two problems. One, you don't want individual repositories to get super big because in Git world at least that slows down. And two, you're tracking independent projects, right? Like we have all of these independent dependencies of FreeType and OpenSSL and NSS and Skia and all of these other things. And so how do you track which versions of each of these things you're pulling in? So somehow you need to pull all of the code down from all of these independent repositories and assemble them into a single consistent predictable set of versions. That's what the problem we're trying to solve. Submodules, personally, one problem that I found with them is that it's very difficult to see and manage when you have changes in the lower level submodule directories.
But gclient just hides those changes instead.
That's also true. So, yeah.
We could track all of it. Maybe you want to see how many people really want to go into that.
That's a good suggestion. Yeah. So let's table this for a minute. We'll see if there are other questions and we can come back to it. Are there other questions? Phil. Moving Skia into the main Chromium repo. I don't have any thoughts, but Stefan's really shaking his head no. And one big problem there is that Skia is also used by Android heavily. And I don't know how well that would play if we tried to merge it in as part of Chromium. I think the Android guys might get upset with us. Skia also does have the same problem that we have in Blink, which is that they have a lot of baselines and things like that, and you probably want to actually figure out how to move a lot of these big binary files out of the repo. They've actually done a lot of work on that, and we're hoping to use a lot of the work that they've done to make that easier in Blink. Yes, that is something we would like to do. The approach they used is actually a little bit different than I think the approach we might want to use, because they sort of rolled tools by hand to manage the checksums, and it turns out there's a tool called Git Annex that actually does kind of the same thing but is better integrated with Git, that we might want to use instead. So the infrastructure team is sort of evaluating whether or not that we should try to do that for Blink instead of the hand rolled thing. Um, Basically, yeah. So this is actually a part of the larger question of merging the repos. I personally don't think it'll be practical to merge the repos until we can solve the baseline problem and get most, if not all, of the baselines out of the Blink repo, because the Blink code itself is only about 200 megabytes, or maybe 400 megabytes. The repos are like 1.4, 1.5 megabytes of checkout, and then several gigabytes, or 1.5 gigabytes of checkout and several gigabytes of history. Um, so right now we tend to have at least 3 copies of every pixel result. I want to get that down to 1 because I want to move everything over to using the same common mock theme that is platform independent and platform independent text rendering, to the free type question that was asked earlier, for most of the test. Not all of the test, but the 90% where you don't care if the control was, you just know there's a scroll bar. You don't care if the scroll bar was right. That's not the point of the test. You don't care if the text was drawn correctly. That's not the point of the test. There's just text in the test, right? All of that stuff should be done platform neutrally. And so that would probably prune out about 1.2 gigabytes at checkout. And then at that point, it might be feasible to merge the repos because we really only have one set of baselines for most things, but we might still want to get rid of them. And so those are both things that I'm hoping to evaluate in Q4 once we actually get some of the current tasks done with.
Yeah.
You wait. You can ask me later. Yes.
Yeah. Some thoughts on the rebuild review system.
Okay.
So you can only upload one diff, basically one blob, and if you have something which would make sense as multiple commits. I mean, I realize you don't like long-lived topic branches. I mean, that's because of the content rebasing. But sometimes I had, for example, one review where it became massively easier to review if I split it into 4 or 5 steps.
Yeah.
I think getting that into review was really painful because
Yeah.
it just doesn't have that concept.
Yeah.
You
Thoughts on that?
about that?
Yes, thoughts on that. Let me repeat the question. So often you're doing a series of changes, right, that they build on top of each other, and you can do a big roll-up patch that actually has everything at once, which is hard to review. So it would be nice if we had better tooling around breaking those up into the individual patches and uploading those, and then managing them all as a coherent set of things. Is that pretty good way of?
So one
Yeah.
change list is a set of commits, and then you would upload
Right.
a set of commits, something like that.
So thoughts? Yes. I agree with you. That would be nice. I do that a lot. And I having to juggle, one roll-up patch versus independent patches that build on top of each other, and Rietveld will get confused when the base for your diff is actually some other patch rather than the tree, right? That happens quite frequently. Um, It would be great to make that better. I think Garrett, which is a tool that the Chrome OS team uses, and a lot of the other Git-based projects that we use actually has better tooling for this. I think that there is an open question as we are migrating onto Git, of how long Rietveld has its independent life versus switching to Garrett. And we may be looking at something to merge the two or switch to Garrett and get some of the best versions of each. I don't know, Julie, if you thought about this at all, maybe you could say something on this. Okay.
We also have an experimental work going on in building a brand new UI for code review built on top of Polymer.
So to repeat that, Julie says that there is also a side project people are working on to build a new code review tool, at least a new UI on top of the Polymer toolkit, using all of the goodness of custom elements and Shadow DOM. Stefan, did you have anything you wanted to add about Garrett versus Rietveld?
Garrett does handle boot, his problem better than retail.
It has its own problems. So,
Believe it or not, switching code retail is more controversial than switching because it's more complicated. So there's no clear consensus that developers want to move off of retail. That's one thing. The other thing is we have a lot of customization in retail supported and probably using Garrett before. So I'm just going to say it's not at all clear that it's been brought up, but there's no
yeah. So to repeat that for everybody, Stefan was saying that Garrett does handle this problem better. Switching from Rietveld to Garrett is actually more controversial than switching from SVN to Git. People tend to be pretty wedded to their code review workflows, and Garrett is definitely kind of bare bones in some ways. We have a lot of customizations for Chromium specific things in Rietveld, so that's not really an open. But I think the takeaway at least is, yeah, we would like to make that particular workflow work better, regardless of if it's in Rietveld or if it's in Garrett or whatever. Okay, next question. Yes, sir.
So a couple of failures that are reported in my direction from various sheriffs end up pointing at a blink role. This is much less of a problem. We've got a robot. If we ever get deployed in the future, for those problems go away. But is there any possibility of being able to bisect into blink roles?
Ooh, good question. Good question. Yeah. Yeah, we actually have added the ability to do this two different ways within the past week or two. So the QA teams actually have scripts where they actually we archive all of the continuous builds for Chromium, and so you can actually bisect looking for test cases and failures automatically using the continuous builds of Chromium. Just last week, we enabled that for Blink builds as well. So now you can actually use their scripts to bisect into the Blink builds. And then Tony also talked yesterday on the perf side about having bisect bots that actually can bisect into Blink failures and Blink roles right there. That is not quite as automated as the binary bisecting tools, and it's slower because the perf bots actually do builds from source rather than pulling in the binaries. We have been talking with them about merging these two capabilities so we can take advantage of the binaries where they exist. But yeah, we haven't really worked out the workflow for that, but the capability is now there. It wasn't before last week. So I think that's something we are going to be improving pretty quickly on.
Just on that topic, when we do use one of the bots to do a build from source, do we also cache that build up on the continuous build servers, just so that no one ever has to do that build twice in that provision?
Yes, we probably could. So, yeah, so a lot of you may know that we recently switched to using Google Cloud Storage to store all these things, and I have, been somewhat tongue-in-cheek told that this is free. So I don't know if this is actually free. I think this is going to work out. We'll see after we have about 6 months worth of data, how many, how much storage this is actually taking up, and we'll need to tune the retention periods. But yeah, there's no reason that we can't keep caching more builds. There is a big infrastructure project called Swarming and Isolates that hasn't really hit the Blink world that much as well, where we also have another content address store where we cache things. And there's some talk about being able to move things from short-term storage to long-term storage that we can work out. Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, now that we have things being stored in Google Cloud Storage, it becomes a lot easier to bootstrap these builds and save yourself a lot of time. So the underlying infrastructure is now there. It's a matter of building tools, and a lot of the stuff, like the APIs for Google Cloud Storage, are all public. They're all there. That's all. You don't need API keys or special IPs to access this stuff. So you could all feel free to start playing with scripts and writing tools to do this stuff yourself. But yeah, we should do that. Yes, I do know if it's gone anywhere. The answer is no, it hasn't. Um, so Goma is a system we don't tend to talk about a lot, but it's basically a distributed build farm that we use on the bots to accelerate things. Um, I believe that we would actually love to make this available, but there are limitations around it because of the way it was actually implemented. It uses a lot of internal Google technology to actually do the distributing of builds. Now they've been changing a lot of that recently. They're moving a lot of it onto Google Cloud's compute engine and Google Cloud Storage. And I think it's possible once a lot of that stuff has been done that we can reopen this discussion. But the Goma team is very small. It's basically like one or two guys' side projects. And so um, they have not been able to actually, come anywhere close to having the time to step up and say, yeah, we could open this up to the rest of the world. There's also interesting overlap between a lot of what Goma does and sort of things going on in the Google Cloud platform itself of, developing in the cloud and things like that. And so who knows what's going to happen up there. But yeah, at the moment, we hear this a lot from people, contributors who, can't necessarily shell out the $6,000 for the state-of-the-art workstation with the 16 cores and the 64 gigs of RAM, and they're like, I can't build on my MacBook Air. Please help me. Um, and yeah, we can't help you. We would love to be able to help you, but we can't yet. Okay, other questions? How am I doing on time, by the way? I have another talk like probably right now. So, um, hmm? Yeah, I think this stopped at 1/2 past. Nobody else has wandered in, so I'm not sure what. Anybody have the schedule up on screen? Can they tell me where? Hmm? Where?
Supposed to go to 10:45 and the next talk starts at 11.
At 11. Okay. All right. So let's wind down. If you want to, if anybody's interested in the submodule talk, we can talk through that for 5 or 10 minutes. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Again, if you have any problems at all, I'm happy to be the funnel. For enhancement requests, things like that. Just questions about what the tools can and can't do. I really don't mind getting questions. I love getting questions. If it means that you'll be more productive or happier or just able to do your jobs better. All right. Thanks.